Well, hello everyone, and welcome to our news section, which is where we're going to look at the rise of Sinn Féin, as you can see, between 1916 and 1918. I say a remarkable story, this, coming from the embers of the rising now, and within the space of 2.5 years, or you could say earlier than that, this becomes the dominant political force now in nationalist Ireland. It is a remarkable story. And I'd say it's often painted as kind of rather simplistic, this story, which is the fact that the British cracked down rather heavily after the Easter Rising, not that heavily really, and the people are almost awakened, as it were, from their slumber, nationalist slumber, and they suddenly now embrace an advanced form of nationalism, a move towards full separatism, and Sinn Féin come to embody that feeling. We'll see that isn't true at all. It's a very rocky road, this. There's lots of ups and downs, and there's absolutely nothing inevitable about the rise or victory of Sinn Féin. So I want to make that very, very clear. And just here in our first part, I just want to talk a little bit about, I suppose, the aftermath, maybe medium term sort of aftermath of the Easter Rising in 1916. And I'd say some of the deep problems that any kind of political movement which is trying to claim the dubious legacy of the Easter Rising face almost an impossible task when you think about it. I mean, firstly, the leaders of the Rising are dead. They're all dead. And presumably they had some idea what they were doing. As we've said, they're an eclectic and peculiar bunch of people, but maybe they had something in their head about what they were going to do going forward, but they're all gone. And as we said, this very unlikely coalition, you imagine, would never hold together anyway outside of the heat of battle with the socialists and the right-wing kind of Catholic kind of crowd, all kinds of people in there. And I say their kind of reversion to the kind of crude methods, I suppose, of violence and physical force really reflects this, I suppose, frustrating fact that no coherent organisation had emerged to spread the advanced nationalist political message. There's certainly, I say, feelings there, advanced nationalist feelings, but no one's been able to tap into them for decades. It's always the Home Rule Party. I mean, Redmond himself summed up this when he said that the Rising was motivated principally by a hatred of Home Rule. That's what this was about. This is against the Home Rule establishment, the Home Rule Party itself. So it's very much, as it were, on the defensive. Thousands of their activists have been interned, so a potential new movement. Local organisations have been broken up. Their principal propaganda weapon in the shape of the press, of course, has been banned. And Griffith, of course, had used the press incredibly well over the years. And I say even the very real, if rather nebulous kind of sympathy that's out there for the leaders of the Rising doesn't easily translate into the world of practical politics. How are you going to, let's say, link those two together? So ultimately what you've got with the Rising, when you think about it, I say when the dust settles, is this is a military solution to a political problem. And that's the issue. How do you turn this into something political? And I say, ironically, I always think that had the Rising succeeded, it would probably cause more trouble than if it failed. You can imagine them, I say, all sitting around together and trying to work out some coherent political ideology or new political movement. I don't think it would work at all. Now, so considering the sea change that's about to happen, I mean, it's definitely there. I mean, Ireland in the aftermath of the Rising is actually very quiet and it's largely uneventful. You don't get, as you may expect, sort of protests and people out weeping and wailing and chaining themselves to railings or whatever. There's nothing at all like that. It's a very, very quiet place. The radicals, anyone who's not arrested now, they go underground. They keep out of the way. And I say most groups who were, I suppose, either rightly or wrongly associated with the Rising suffer widespread repression by the authorities. So obviously the IRB and the Irish Volunteers, they lost their key leaders. The organisations are now targeted. their martial pretensions, if you like, that they displayed are directionless anywhere. And there's a lot of bravado about the volunteers and what they did and what they achieved, what the IRB achieved. But there's no direction to any of this kind of stuff. We might look maybe to the trade union movement and say, well, perhaps that will be the basis of a kind of national organisation or whatever. But the trade union movement's in a terrible condition, particularly when they lose the transport workers' headquarters at Liberty Hall in Dublin. That's bombed in all the fighting and so on. That's destroyed. So they don't have a sort of home base for that. I said the citizen army has been broken up. Connolly's dead. And maybe more fundamentally what happens is it causes a huge rift in the Irish trade union movement because unions in Belfast, as you can imagine, look down now to Dublin and think, my God, you've thrown your lot in with all these Catholic nationalists. I'm very upset about this. So huge tensions now, I suppose, of a sectarian variety between unionists and nationalists within the trade union movement. So that doesn't look likely either. The GAA maybe is another organisation that could, even though it had nothing to do with the rising, but, cultural activism, all these clubs and things. But again, this is, their sporting events are shut down, their public displays and so on, that's all closed down as well. That's repressed too. So they don't offer a natural kind of avenue forward. So what actually happens with the rising, interesting enough, is far from a kind of, I say, people are risen kind of image. It actually creates a very curious kind of political inertia. And the first public organisation we actually have, which I suppose to draw on even this any kind of support for the rising or to draw on the legacy of the rising, actually focuses on the very safe ground of humanitarianism, which is particularly the sufferings of the interned prisoners, because that's very safe. I mean, I'll show you here actually, if I can. There we go, here. And you can see, they established now a National Aid Association Volunteers Dependent Fund, where you can basically contribute money now. There's many women involved in this. The wives, for example, of executed leaders of the rising, Kathleen Clark, the wife of Tom Clark, the mother of Patrick Pearse, for example, and all the wives and so on and dependents of the men who were interned as well. Financial assistance to the families of the dead and the imprisoned rebels and so on. See, that's very safe ground. And not many people can kind of deny, okay, we might, even if you don't agree with them, what they did and so on. There's poor, women and children are suffering. So let's, so it's very, very safe. It's not very confrontational. And I say the role of these women is quite interesting. Here's an image here. This is Patrick Pearse's mother, as you can see here, who's lost two sons, remember, and Willie and Patrick as well. And she becomes, these women will have a strange role in this revolution, these nationalist women. They will appear, dressed in black at various sort of political and occasions and so on, but be very mute. And it's almost like they become kind of symbolic, kind of focal points for this movement, for this very diffuse movement. Very, very peculiar. So they don't really say anything, but they're always there. For example, these women are offered honorary seats in the Dáil. And it's almost like they're kind of the ghosts almost of their dead husbands and sons and relatives. It's a very, very strange role they play. But I think early on, certainly these women, the widows and mothers and so on, become there's some kind of focus for all this, these kind of feelings and so on. So there isn't even a call in this for kind of amnesty for the prisoners or anything like that. There's nothing political at all about this, the internees. No one's mentioning that here at the start. They will later, but now simple, safe idea. Get some money for the poor, starving orphans. That's fine. And most people agree with this. Now, when it comes to the internees and the prisoners, just to mention the fact that many of them aren't interned for very long. Around half of the people who are interned after the rising are released after a week. So I said they round up all these people who've got really nothing to do with anything, and they're let go in a week. The ones who are left now, who they think probably do have something to do with the rising, and they're usually kind of right, are, well, they're split into two basic groups. The vast majority of them who are interned are actually stuck here in an internment camp here in North Wales at Frongoch. Now, this is an old German prisoner of war camp from the First World War. And I say they're thrown in there. The other sort of leadership, people that really, so people like Griffith and De Valera, Eamon De Valera and so on, people who they're really suspicious of, 100, 150 of them, they're put in prisons, proper prisons in Britain, and turned in there. But I say most of your rank and file, kind of volunteers and people who took part in it, I say are kept here now. Now, Frongoch itself is a very interesting place, mainly because it's here the hardcore of the radical activists will basically, upon their release, come from Frongoch. And what's actually happened here, and this is a terrible British mistake, the same mistake, by the way, they make with internment in 1971 during the Troubles, 1973, when they intern everyone, is they've done the job for the movement in terms of bringing everyone together. All these activists. So you've got all these people, from Kerry and Sligo and Dublin and so on, never met, never had a conference or anything, never come together, but they're brought together at Frongoch, and it allows them now to really hammer out some kind of orthodox movement and methodology, which is why it becomes to be known as the University of Revolution, the Sinn Féin University. So these people will emerge from this, not in any sense, going back on their revolutionary aspirations, but certainly with a lot more contacts and a lot more people they know from all around the country. And so I say they hone their rhetoric, and connect all the diverse elements of this advanced nationalism, which no one had been able to do for decades, but now the British are almost allowing them to kind of do it. And a kind of new elite emerges now in Frongoch, and within the prisons generally. But within Frongoch, of course, one man jumps out, and that, of course, is this man here, Michael Collins. So Collins is in Frongoch. Collins has been just a lowly foot soldier during the Rising. It's in the GPO, doesn't really do a great deal, Collins. But it's when he's in Frongoch that he really demonstrates his remarkable organisational and leadership abilities. Collins himself, just to mention Collins is from West Cork. He'd spent now a decade living in London. And he throws in his job in London. He worked at the post office and some financial institutions, throws that job in and goes back to take part in the Rising. But I say, his remarkable abilities are going to be shown, as it were, in the rough and tumble of the camp. Collins, many people break under this, as you can imagine. Collins seems to thrive, though. As a figure, Collins, if you want to get a sense of Collins, he's a big, bulking, often crude, quite violent man. And I mean, here's a comparison we might relate to. I suppose the closest thing I've seen to the character of a Michael Collins, he's like a kind of Tony Soprano figure, really. He's that kind of figure. He's quite a scary figure. And, he's like a big-hearted bully, Collins. We have very numerous sympathetic portrayals of him in films and so on, and the less said about the films, the better. But he's someone who's bursting with energy, and he organises sports matches and drills the men and bribes the guards and so on. But he's very overbearing as a kind of figure. Loves rough and tumble, loves a punch-up. He's a man's man in that sense. Here's a quote from one of his old comrades, Joe Sweeney from Donegal. And here we are here. I think this is a nice summary of Collins. So he could be a warm, friendly, passionate, boisterous, fun-loving and generous individual with a moderate and rational outlook, but he could just as easily be a cold, dour, unreasonable and utterly ruthless person, an arrogant bully with a ferocious temper and a mean, vindictive streak. So, yeah, that's the two sides, as it were, of Collins. And what they do in Frongoch, and what Collins is doing, is as they start to organise themselves, they come up with various kind of short-lived movements. Here's one example, the Black Hand, Lots of these. Black Hand, of course, is the name, as you know, I'm sure, the Serbian nationalist group, which ends up starting the First World War by killing Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Another revolutionary group. There's loads of these kind of groups. But I see, so the wheat from the chaff is almost being sorted out in this revolutionary hierarchy now, as it kind of develops. And Collins is someone who's rising to the top. And what Collins is particularly good at is having a network of contacts and an embryonic kind of organisation, including a revived IRB, which Collins himself is eventually going to become head of. So Collins is, I say, it is kind of like, and again, I'm not trying to make a value judgment on this, but if you want to think about it like the mafia, in a way, in terms of its organisation, it's secret world of Collins. Collins is not going to be a gunman. Collins will probably never pick up a gun again in his life. But he's going to be someone now with a black book, and he's going to know who's who and who to eliminate. And he's that kind of, he's more of a spy master type figure in that way. And I say he'll be like a mafia don in that he'll send out lots of young men to carry out assassinations and whatever. Again, we'll get to that during the War of Independence. Collins, I suppose, ultimately, his biggest contribution to all this is Collins is very critical of the kind of dreamy idealism, the heroic failure thing, which is kind of hardwired almost into Irish republicanism by now. Everyone fails. You expect to kind of fail. And then you have a nice speech from the gallows or whatever, and, sympathy grows for you. Collins had the rather unique idea of maybe having the revolution and winning. Wow, no one's really had that idea before. We could actually win this. So he's going to take his revolution, if you like, in a far more pragmatic direction, which is going to prove to be absolutely devastating. So that's just, I'd say, what's going on with these prisoners. They're sitting in there now, beginning to kind of organise themselves. Now, politically outside, of course, still the representatives of Irish opinion at this time are, of course, the Home Rule Party. And both Redmond and Dillon, as we said last time, are in a really difficult situation. What do they do? I mean, they both move to quickly condemn the rising, certainly, as would be expected, but increasingly as they turn their criticisms towards the kind of severity of British government policy, as we saw with Dillon. And this is Dillon makes his speech on the 11th of May to try and say, stop these executions. They're crazy people, the ones who launched the rising. They're misguided idiots. But do you know what? At least they came out and fought a fair fight, as it were. And, we need to stop this. But I say the fact that the executions themselves, scheduled for the next day, go ahead anyway, to many people shows just how completely powerless the Home Rule Party is in Parliament. It cannot. No one even seems to listen to it. So they are taking their blows as well. They look rather impotent in kind of the wake of this. Now, of course, they won't last very long because the movement, which is the point of this whole section, which is going to come to replace them and come to dominate Irish politics now, is faring really little better in this new fluid situation. As we said, Sinn Féin is blamed now by the press. And you'll see there on the right, there's a newspaper, this clipping from this is during the rising. Now, the press is saying chaos in Dublin. Remember, it lasts a week, so the press gets time to react and work out what's going on. And they say, well, it must be Sinn Féin, this Sinn Féin thing. Now, I say Sinn Féin is not a political party. It's almost a half-mocking label for any nationalist who's more radical than the Home Rule Party. This whole nebulous cloud of advanced nationalism. But you just say Sinn Féin, or Sinn Féiners. But as I say, it's the only credible catch-all name that exists in people's heads for those associated with advanced nationalism. And most importantly, I say the press latch onto this and it now sticks. And of course, it's Arthur Griffith, an incredibly unlikely situation. Griffith now, who seems to be the head of this, he has the domain name, as I say, he's the head of this movement. Now, he's in jail because he's Mr. Sinn Féin. Nothing to do with any of this, but he's been rounded up as well. And with him in jail, I say people look now to Sinn Féin, whatever it might be, this is where this is where their focus is going to be. It's what are they going to do? Who's going to be put in charge of it? And to show you just how disorganized this whole movement is, the man who's put in charge is this man here. Very bizarre character, Herbert Moore Pym. So he's the one who's put in charge of this essentially non-existent Sinn Féin organisation. As we said, Sinn Féin is basically a newspaper. And you'll see he's a very strange man. He's anti-Semitic, very conservative, like Griffith as well. Very odd and eccentric. And as I mentioned there, he writes some very strange stories on Ulster vampires and obsession with the Mona Lisa. He's another oddball. In the end, what he'll end up doing, this guy, is, he will end up he's an Orangeman. He'll end up going back and become a hardline unionist of all things. Very strange. And, the thing about this Sinn Féin, remember, what's Sinn Féin's policy? Well, they're not Republican, remember. They're not Republican at all. They're dual monarchists. Remember the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which, again, to add more, chaos to the situation, is of course falling apart as they speak during the First World War. This dual monarchy of Austro-Hungary, which Griffith writes a book about, and so on. Very, very peculiar. These are not in any way, this isn't a Republican movement, and Griffith is never really a Republican anyway. But they do manage to get a newspaper out, and that's what they really are, essentially, is activist journalists. And the newspaper comes out, again, a very bizarre newspaper, to show you how, undirected this organisation is. It's full of, there's political stuff in there, there's Gaelic poetry, there's all kinds of odd things in Sinn Féin, the new Sinn Féin newspaper. But I suppose you say, at least there's a thing called Sinn Féin, and there's moves towards some kind of organisation, I suppose, going forward. But really, in the first, 6 months or so after the Easter Rising, there is no real sense of a growing movement, no real sense of dynamism or a people arisen and all. There's just nothing there. Now, we know these little things are going on in the prisons and so on, but it does not look likely at all that, even though there is this sympathy, and people generally do feel sorry for the victims of the rising, both those killed or imprisoned or their wives and family, and there is that real sense of how awful this has been. But no way is this at the moment translating into anything like a political kind of movement. Now, next time we'll talk about, what really is going to drive the creation of this new thing called Sinn Féin. Is not going to come from within Ireland, not going to come from within the nationalist movement at all. It's actually going to come from outside. And it's going to be the moves of the British government, rather like Frongoch, which are going to, the decisions of the government now, which are going to allow, as it were, from this, this nebulous cloud of advanced nationalism, a more coherent organisation now to begin to be formed. So we'll talk about that in our next lecture. Okay, folks, thanks.